إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, this is the fourth session in looking at the axioms or the principles of our jurisprudence with our guest lecturer and teacher, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayyah حفظه الله. بسم الله.
أن هذه النجاسة هي نجاسة معنوية.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Shaykh said, praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and glorifying Allah, the one who there's no knowledge except what He teaches. And then he said again, we're going to return to our subject, which was looking at the axiom that certainty is not removed by doubt. And then he said that we want to look at some of the things that relate to this, particulars that involve this, and other axioms that are really branches of this principle itself. And also to look at some of the legal rulings that have been derived from this principle. He said that, he mentioned yesterday several of these principles. For instance, that the basis of all things is permissibility, that the foundational state of the human being is one free of responsibility, that if responsibility has been in fact if responsibility occurs based on something that's certain, that nothing can remove that responsibility except some other certainty that is more certain. And then he said also that the foundation of things, when there is some command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that what's understood first and foremost is that that command should be fulfilled in the soonest possible time, that there shouldn't be a delay unless there's a clear indication that there should be a delay. And then he said that another aspect of this is that the foundation of things is purity, that things are considered what is known as tahir, and tahir is the opposite of najis, which is impure. And everything in creation is pure before it's considered impure. So this is the foundational state of things themselves. So he said, for instance, if you see a rose outside on a plant, then the assumption is always that something is pure before one would look to its impurity. And he said this includes also the human being. The human being is considered to be pure in his state. He said even if this human being is a polytheist, a mushrik, an idolater, and he said that this is known as taharatul a'yan, which is the purity of essential things. It's not the a'yan or the essential things, the substantial things. It's not looking at the accidentals or those things, the accidents that are related to things, but the actual essence of a thing is pure. And he said, although there is a difference of opinion, again, about this matter. And he said, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu really sees that this principle is comprehensive, completely. In other words, Imam Malik says this applies to everything, that the foundation of things is purity. And so Imam Malik, in contradistinction to the other Imams, actually views all animals, every animal, irrespective of it being a dog or a pig or any animal in creation, is considered pure. And not only is it pure, but also it's the things that come from it, the spit, the mucus, the sweat, all of these things are pure. Also its egg is pure. And then the Shaykh said, although there is a weak opinion that states, he said it's an unusual opinion, but it does exist, and that is that the mushrik or the idolater is impure. And this is based on the Quranic verse which states that the mushrikun are people that Allah says that they're najis, and najis means impure. And it says, and for that reason they should not go near the sacred masjid, the sanctuary, after the Prophet ﷺ gained sovereignty over it. So the Shaykh said that there are some who interpreted this outwardly, metaphorically, because he also mentioned earlier that yesterday we were reminded of the fact that the first and foremost given speech is always that we take it literally. So unless there's a reason to take it metaphorically. So in this case, some of the scholars said, Allah says they're impure, we take that literally. So they say that they're impure. It's actually a sensory impurity. And the other imams said, no, this impurity is metaphorical, that it's really indicative of a spiritual state. They're in a state of impurity in their meaning, not in their outward form, but in their inward reality. And so, given that, we don't consider them najis if you shake their hand. And this is the dominant opinion. The other one is actually a weak and rare opinion, but it does exist. So the Shaykh said that, therefore, based on this understanding, that we consider everything tahir. And he said this includes those things in which we think that it could be possible that it might not be a tahir. In other words, when you look at something and you have some doubt, again, this goes under this principle that certainty is not removed by doubt. Unless you have a clear reason to consider it impure, then you wouldn't. But again, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu disagrees here, not with the principle, but he makes certain distinctions. For instance, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu says that if somebody who is not known to really guard their tahara, their state of tahara, in other words, people who are seen to not really be that concerned about things that are impure, if that person's known for that, oftentimes ignorant people, for instance, if that person is known for that, then Imam Malik says that we would assume that the clothes are pure unless those clothes involve his personal area. For instance, somebody's undergarment. That Imam Malik radiallahu anhu says no. There's a high probability, because this is a person that might not wash after he goes to the toilet. There's a high probability that it's impure. So Imam Malik says we assume that it's najis, even though we don't have a proof. So again, he's not going against the principle, but it's really a cautious position, because that's his madhab is extremely cautious. Whereas the other imams say that the asr al-ashya tahara, that the foundation of things is tahara, until you have a clear proof. Because of this principle, certainty is not removed by doubt. And so again, the Shaykh said that there are because the a'yan, the substances themselves are considered pure, but and it's only a specific amount of things that emerge or come out of a'yan, of things that are considered impure, and those have been clarified by the sacred law. For instance, pus and putrefied matter that comes out, the fluid that comes out of wounds, for instance. These type things have been clarified by the Sharia. Other than that, we're going to assume that things are pure. So the Shaykh said that, again, there's some difference of opinion in, for instance, the dog, the spittle of the dog, what comes out of the dog's mouth. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu considered that these things were pure, including the spit, the foam, the mucus, anything that comes from directly from the mouth. And he said that also this includes the wild animals, what they call the animals with claws, like lions and tigers and leopards and these type of animals. And he said again, he considered that these things to be pure. Now, Umar radiallahu anhu, the Khalifa, and Amr ibn al-As, the governor of Egypt, were once on a journey, and the Shaykh said towards Syria, and they came to a pool in the desert, and they were going to take from the pool, and somebody who was there who knew the pool said, "Don't drink from that pool because wild animals drink from that pool." And Omar said, "Don't tell us things like that, because wild animals drink from these pools, and so do we." and he drank from the pool. So Imam Malik radiallahu anhu took this as an indication that it was not najis. Now, another example of this is the dog. The ulama that said it was najis said that if you look at the hadith, there's a clear hadith, it's a sound hadith that Imam Malik also knew, that is, if a dog licks into a bowl, then you're to wash the bowl 7 times. And this is where the ulama take the impurity of the dog. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said that this is not for impurity, because if it was impurity, then it would go under the category of ma'qulat al-ma'na, that it was understood why that we weren't doing it. Whereas Imam Malik said this is ta'abbudi, and his proof was that it's 7 times. If it was something that was najis, then you would remove it like any najasa. There's no specified number. You just do it until you remove it. If it takes you 2 or 3 or 4 washings, that's all you need to do. Whereas Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said the fact that the lawgiver specified a specific number, then that indicated this indeed was not because of najasa, but it was another wisdom. So it becomes ta'abbudiyya. It was a wisdom that was hidden from us, not because of najasa. So he maintained, again, his principle that all animals are pure, and their spit and their saliva and their mucus is pure, and that includes the dog. And later the Shaykh said that Ibn Rushd al-Kabir, who was also a physician, the great scholar from Cordoba, from Andalusia, he said that the reason for doing this 7 times was in fact for hygienic reasons. That the Prophet ﷺ was not telling us that the dog was najis, but that the mouth of the dog can contain harmful germs. In those days they understood, like rabies and things like that, and that people could get sick from it. So in fact the wisdom behind it was to protect people's health. Now his grandson, the great scholar and also a physician who had books in medicine, said this makes perfect sense if you think about this, that if a dog licks into your bowl, before you use that bowl, it would make a lot of sense to clean the bowl so that you don't get ill. And he said, again, that this is ma'qul. It's something that's rational. There's a rational foundation for it. So the reason the Shaykh said that he's even emphasizing this is because you live in a land where the dog seems to be a very commonplace. And he said because of that fact, it makes it a little easier for the Muslims and also for people that come into Islam, that there's really some room for this. All right. And the Shaykh again didn't hear my talk the other night about the dogs. So the Shaykh said that also Imam Malik radiallahu anhu based his opinion also on the fact that the Quran says that the dogs that you teach, the dogs that you teach to hunt, that what they hunt for you is permissible. Now, if the dog was najis, then if it kills something, obviously it bites it when it kills it, and it would make that which it killed impure. So again, Imam Malik used a proof from the Quran. Now, he said that concerning the taharatul a'yan, he said there's a khilaf about, for instance, khamr, about alcohol. Some say that it is najis because the Quran says about gambling, about divination, and about alcohol, that these are rijsun min amri shaitan. Rijs is a word in the Arabic language that means impure. And so many of the scholars took this to mean that this is the outward of the wine, its actual substance is impure, that it's foul and impure, and therefore it has a najasa. Others said no, that this is in fact najasa ma'nawiyya. It's a impurity of meaning again, and not of the actual thing itself. And their proof for that is that the najis is used, also rijs is used by the Arabs to indicate something that's impure of meaning. The poet of the Prophet ﷺ, Hassan ibn Thabit, mentioned about the kufr being that he said it was not pure, it was not a pure garment. And he used it metaphorically, لَيْسَ طَهْرُ الْأَثْوَابِ. He meant kufr is not a pure garment to wear. And so this impurity of disbelief was an impurity of meaning and not an impurity of the thing itself. And so again, this is an example of using metaphor as opposed to actually meaning it. Now the Quran also says about the awthan that the awthan are rijs. You know that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims were commanded to avoid the rijsun min al-awthan is the impurities of the idols. Now we know that the idol that's made of wood or made of dates or made of stone is not impure. If you touch it, you're not touching something impure. So the Quran uses this meaning. And also, again, it mentions about the meat of the pig being rijs. So these are all examples of using this word rijs. But the Shaykh is saying that some of the ulama interpreted this to mean impurity of meaning and not impurity of the actual substance itself. And then again, about the masjid, because the Quran says, don't allow the mushrikeen to go near the sanctuary of Masjid al-Haram, and this includes the masjid in Medina and the sanctuary, that the Prophet ﷺ allowed one of the mushrik, Uthama, was actually allowed into the masjid, and he watched the people pray, and then he became Muslim. So some of the ulama said that this applies only to the sanctuary and not other masajid. And then even about the Nasara of Najran, who came and visited the Prophet, went into his masjid in Medina, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, went into his masjid in Medina, spoke with him in the masjid, and he allowed them to do that. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said that this means really that the Christians are different from other mushriks. Like the Jews and the Christians are, because they're people of the book, and the Majus have a different status from the other idolaters. And therefore, he said it was actually permissible for them to enter into the masajid. The other imams disagree with them. Some of them say that it's possible for them to enter into some of the mosques, but certainly not the sanctuaries. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, again taking the most cautious position, said this included all the mosques, that a non-Muslim should not enter any mosque because it's undignified for the mosque. It's lack of reverence towards the mosque to allow them. And so, again, this is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. So again, the Shaykh said, speaking about taharat al-ayan, which is the purity of substances in the world, he said that this al-yaqeen la yazuru bi-shak, this is the qa'idah that we're speaking about. This principle should be applied to things when you see them. So you assume that things are pure. So anything you see, the first and foremost assumption should be that it's pure, unless there's a clear proof that it's impure. So you're not going to lose your certainty based on some doubt that's either even substantiated by some outward appearances. Unless you're certain, he said, you should apply the qa'idah. He said Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu even takes it further, because he has a concept in his school called istihala, which is, in a sense, the transubstantiation. It's a chemical change that is occurring in substances. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu says that if something changes, it alters. It no longer has the original qualities or characteristics of the thing when it began, that it no longer has the original hukm of najasa, even though the first ruling was najas. An example of that would be like gelatin. Gelatin is taken from, for instance, the hooves. But because of the transformation that occurs in the process of preparing gelatin and then actually cooking with it, that there's a complete transformation. And it's no longer, if you took it in its original form and took it in its transformed form, it no longer shares the same properties. And for this reason, Abu Hanifa said, because of this istihala, or this change that has occurred, it no longer has the original ruling of najasa. And this is true for other things as well. And the Shaykh said that for that reason, like for instance, an animal that falls into a salt bed and then just disappears, that the salt absorbs all of its nutrients, whatever's left over, it just becomes part of that thing now. It's been absorbed, so it's munghamira. It's completely absorbed by the thing. So if you have acid or something like that that completely absorbs something where there's no longer the original chemical components of that thing, then it's considered tahir. And he said, again, the Shaykh said, Hafidhullah, that especially in this country here, that one of the things that's beneficial about these rulings is it gives you some room to breathe so that you're not overwhelmed by these things. And you can also see the beauty of the Sharia and the expansiveness of the Sharia and how it can be applied really in any situation. So the Shaykh said that now we move to another axiom that's still part of this. It's really a sub-rubric to this principle that we're looking at, and that is bara'atu dhimma, which is al-bara'at al-asriya, the original condition of the human being. And in other words, it's the foundational state of innocence that a human being is in. A human being is born innocent. He has no debt. He has no nothing is sought from him. He has no responsibilities. And this is when he is initially born. Every person is born bari. And the Shaykh said that a person should always be considered in this state. This is that we presume innocence before guilty. In the West, they say a man is innocent before he's proven guilty. And this is basically the same principle, but the Shaykh said really that this is one of the things that the Muslims should have a sense of pride for in their deen, that this is a golden principle. It's a golden rule that was given to us, that human beings are by nature free and innocent before they incur or incriminate themselves by doing things like stealing, like harming somebody, like aggressing against somebody. If they do any of those acts, then at that point, the bara'ah, the innocence, if it can be proven, they lose that and they incriminate themselves. So the Shaykh said that this does not obviously mean that you cannot, for instance, stipulate in your will for some child that's even in the womb or something like that. Because what we're looking at here, he said, is that people reach a point in which they're complete in their understanding. And this is the point where they become responsible. This is what they call, first happens the tamyiz, which is the age of discrimination, which occurs at the age of 7. And then later the age of bulugh, which is the point in which a person reaches puberty. And according to the Muslims, this is the point where they become responsible. So they have responsibilities, but those responsibilities are only those which the sacred law has dictated that they be responsible for. Other than that, they shouldn't be considered responsible for something. So the Shaykh said that in this case, that we don't believe in original sin. We don't believe that a human being is born with a wrong. The Quran clearly states that no one bears the sin of another. The Quran states that man only has what he himself accrues or strives for. That somebody else, the Quran says no one bears the burden of another, even if it's his own relatives. That you do not take on the sins of people before you. The sins of fathers are not inherited by their children. And this is important because if you really look at the meaning of this, it allows every person to be born into the world free to determine for himself how others are going to judge him and look at him. That he is not simply condemned or judged because of what his fathers or his ancestors did. No, he's taken at face value that he himself must prove to people who he is. That he is given that chance because he has this bara'at al-asriya. And he said that's why really this is something that is extremely important. And one of the things that we understand from this is that the qadi, when you go into a courthouse and you say, so-and-so owes me money and he hasn't paid me, So you're raising a case against somebody. The qadi says, the judge will say that that his dhimma is bari'ah, that he has no responsibility. That's this foundational state of this person. So you have to prove that he owes you money. Because the state of a person is that he's free of debt. That's his state. So you need to prove that he indeed owes you money. And that's why we have things, when you take loans, you write it down. So he points at, and there's the thing, and he hasn't paid me. There's no proof that he paid. Like that. So the point is this qa'idah has very, very important implications in many, many areas. And these are just a few of them.
لا تبرأوا إلا بيقين.
So another very important ruling that goes under this one, similar to this al-bara'at al-asiriyya or dhimma here, is that if responsibility has indeed occurred, if it's occurred, then it is only removed by certainty. So this is going to have very important implications. The Shaykh said, for instance, in legal rulings, if you have a debt that you have incurred, so you borrowed money from so-and-so, and that has been proven, now the onus is on you, because now the dhimma has occurred, your responsibility. Your original state is bara'ah, which is the opposite of dhimma, which is responsibility. But now responsibility has occurred as a result of you borrowing money. So your first state was you were free of debt. Now you've incurred debt. So now if a person who it's been proven that you owed him money, and he goes to the judge and he says, so-and-so owes me money, and then you say, no, I don't. At this point, the onus is now on the person who is being accused of not fulfilling his debt, because he admits that indeed I did have a debt with him, but I paid the debt. So now the only way that can be removed is by certainty. So the qadi will say, given that you admit that you did indeed borrow money from him, so there's the dhimma the responsibility has indeed occurred. Now that responsibility cannot be removed in order to return back to your original state, which is bara'ah, until you prove to the qadi that indeed you did pay the debt. And so you have to show him. So if you don't have witnesses, things like that, you need to be able to prove that the debt was indeed paid, or else you still owe him a debt. So the Shaykh said, now we're going to go to another qa'idah, which is again under the rubric of our great qa'idah here, that's al-yaqeen la yazur bil-shak. That's the qa'idah that we're looking at, but these are sub-rubrics to that qa'idah, and they each have different permutations and different facets. So the Shaykh said that the next qa'idah is called baqa'u ma kana ala ma kan, that things continue as they were in the past. Things continue along the same lines that they were in the past. And he said again that there are many, many practical applications to this qa'idah, this principle. For instance, what we always look at is the preceding time first and foremost, as opposed to what follows. So, for instance, he said the example, he doesn't like to use this example, but he said this is the example that the usuliyun, the people of qawaid, and these people always use, so he's using it because he doesn't like divorce to occur, but they use the example of divorce, that if a woman comes and she says, my husband divorced me, by simply her stating, my husband divorced me, implicit in her statement is that they were indeed married. Now, because of this rule, baqa'u ma kana ala ma kan, you continue on in the same state you were in, that since she's admitting she was married, we should assume she's married unless she can prove otherwise. So again, the onus of proof is upon the woman, because this is the original state, the first time, not the following example. And the same is true, he said, with debt. The same is true also for somebody who sells something to a person. If a merchant sells something, and then he goes to the person and he says, he goes to the judge and he says, I sold him this thing, he didn't pay me. Given that he sold him the thing and he admits that indeed he bought it, then there has to be some proof that he indeed paid him. And this is also vice versa. He says, well, I bought the thing from him, he never actually gave me the item that I bought. So again, بقاء ما كان على ما كان. We have to assume always the foundational state. What was the original state? The original state when you buy something is you didn't have it. So that's the assumption, that you didn't actually get it. And also that you didn't actually pay for it until there's some proof, which is why obviously, I mean, all these examples in our culture, we have signing things when you receive something. All these type things are examples of ways of preserving these because these are human concerns. And also, he said there's a khilaf in relation to nafaqa. هو الذي قاله إمام شافعي أن إذا هي تدعي أنه لا تنفق
لا ينفق عليها أنها هي معها الحق هو الذي عليه يأتي بالبينة لأن أصل النفقة في يده لم يدفعها
نعم
بينما قال مالك العكس
نعم. So there's a khilaf between Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i about this in relation to maintenance. Imam Shafi'i says if a woman claims that her husband did not pay her, because a woman's supposed to get allowance in her house. She has a right to allowance. And if she didn't get that allowance, then she goes to the qadi and said, look, he's not giving me my financial allowance. And according to Imam Shafi'i, he says, بَقَاءُ مَا كَانَ عَلَى مَا كَانَ, that the money is in his hand. So we should assume that he hasn't paid it until he can prove that he's paid it. Whereas Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, no, she's living in his house. So the assumption is that he's taking care of her. So she has to prove. So they're using the same principle, but they're looking at it from different perspective. Imam Malik saying that no, the original state is she entered into marriage with him. She's being maintained by him. That's what was the original state. Not that he wasn't paying her, that he was indeed paying her. So she needs to prove that he's not paying her. Imam Shafi'i said, no, the money's in his hand. So they're not disagreeing on the principle, they're disagreeing on the application of the principle. Which perspective do you look at? And again, this is why it's ijtihad. And then he mentioned also that one of the benefits of this is that when you buy something to a term, that the term indeed ends. There has to be proof, because the original thing is that the term hadn't ended. So you need to have proof that the term in fact finished for paying something. And also for a house. If somebody says he sold me that house, the original state is that he's Malik al-Bayt, he owned it first. So بَقَاءُ مَا كَانَ عَلَى مَا كَانَ, until you can prove that he indeed sold you the house, you don't have any title. This is what they call title and deed. Right? And escrow and all these things are in order to establish these things, and this is our Sharia centuries ago. And then he said that Ibn Asim radiallahu anhu in al-Asimiyya, he was a famous jurist from Granada, he wrote a text which has all the rules of the qadi, and in that he says, if you want to know who is the mudda'i and who's the mudda'i alayh, who's the accuser, who's the one who's raising who's actually making the accusation, and who's the defendant. If you want to know it, he said, it's very simple. You just need to learn one statement. Whoever says قَدْ كَانَ, whoever says that this is what happened, and whoever says لَمْ يَكُنْ. So whoever's saying what the original was, and whoever's saying no, it didn't happen. One is the what follows, and the other is what preceded. And because of this qa'idah, you look at what was the original state, what preceded. So it's very simple to determine who's the defendant and who's the accused, who's the accuser, or they call it not the accuser, plaintiff. Thank you. Who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant? That's how you understand it.